Hi, I'm Thomas Graves, and welcome back to the Black Mold of Grief. This is going to be a little shift in the podcast where I'm going to be a little more clinical now, leaving the biographical story a little bit and get more into the 5 stages of grief and how I know which stage I'm in, what my tells are, how I navigate them, how I lie to myself about which stage I'm in, and so it'll be a little bit more of a practical section. So this episode is going to be an overview of the 5 stages, what they are from a clinical standpoint, but then also how I view them and how I visualize them. The stages of grief were first published and discovered by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in her book On Death and Dying in 1969. And she was working with end-of-life patients and noticed that they were going through the same stages of grief. And the stages, the acronym is DABDA: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And first they were denying that they were going to die, then they were angry they were going to die, and then they started bargaining with if they had gotten another opinion, if they'd taken another course of action. Then they were depressed that they were going to die, and then they accepted that they were going to die. And so that was her theory. Since then, if you go online, there's some controversy over whether or not that's accurate. My take on it is accurate, but the term stages is what throws people. My personal theory on that is that she was working with people who were heading into death. So there were stages, and the term stages kind of has a connotation that it flows naturally and you move from one to another in a very linear, very sequential fashion. And I believe the people that she was working with who were heading into death, I think that is accurate. But for me and my experience, and this is where, from what I've read with people's opinions online, when you're surviving a death of a loved one, you're not heading into death. You're heading into life without them, which is a totally different thing. And so that's why people heading into life without a loved one, the term stages is for me what the chaotic thing and the controversy seems to be. It just doesn't match the experience. There are no linear progressions. It doesn't flow naturally from one to the other. It just is just all over the map. So I do think that their order of the 5 is accurate, and I think that the 5 are accurate, but I've kind of adjusted the term stages to match, for me, what I feel is more correct in the experience. And so what I say is not the 5 stages of grief, but I call them the bingo cards of grief. All right. And I also call it the 5 escape hatches of grief. And so let me start with the bingo cards. If you picture people playing bingo, they don't play one bingo card. They play 20, 30, 50 of them at a time. And that's what it feels like when you're grieving, because when you're missing someone, you're not grieving just one person, and you're not grieving one aspect of them. You're grieving every aspect of who they were to you. So if they were a confidant, a career advisor, somebody who could make you laugh, somebody that you binge watched a favorite show, any of those things, all aspects of those things are each a different bingo card. And each time that you try to pick up the phone, or each time you watch the show, whatever those things are, that's a separate bingo card as well. And each of those bingo cards has the 5 stages, and you have to grieve each of those bingo cards. And when there is too much pain on one bingo card, the natural impulse is to jump to another one. And on top of that, there's like this evil bingo card master who just keeps handing you bingo cards that you don't want. And you're like, okay, I've got enough. I don't need more. And they just keep handing you more and more bingo cards. So that, for me, is a more accurate depiction of what it feels like and how it does not feel linear. It feels whack-a-mole, jumping all over the place, like I'm trying to play 50 bingo cards all at once. And the other part to that is, and I did lose a sister to cancer, and I'm certain, and I know she had a lot of pain with that. So I'm not comparing pain for pain of someone heading to death and someone heading into life, because I'm not going there, and I wouldn't. But it's, as far as the bingo cards go, regardless of your faith, if you're an atheist, then you don't believe there's anything else. So the opportunity for pain doesn't exist after death. If you are a person of faith, regardless of faith, then the general belief is that things are better. And so the opportunities for pain don't exist after death either for the person who has passed. But again, for the person still here, the opportunities never end, because each moment is a moment you can miss that person. And again, so that's another bingo card. So that's why the bingo cards just keep coming. And then as far as the escape hatches of grief, I started looking at that because I realized that, again, they're not stages that I go through. I started looking at them as a relationship to my pain, because I'm not grieving necessarily the loss of the person. It's the pain of the person that I'm trying to avoid, the pain of the loss of the person. And so when I am in denial, I'm not denying that my sister passed. I'm not denying that my nephew passed. I'm not denying that Jenny passed or that my two moms passed. Like, I know the facts of their passing. I know they passed. So I'm not denying that. I'm denying the amount of pain that I feel so that I can get through the day. And so once I realized that, everything else kind of shifted into, what is the relationship with the pain? And so the stages of grief shifted to escape hatches from the grief. So I started picturing grief like a muddy army crawl in your stomach, when you're going through the trenches, with a platform above me about 18 inches with 5 escape hatches onto the platform. And the 5 escape hatches are the 5 stages, and they're in the same order. And so when I'm crawling through the pain, when it gets to be too much, the first escape hatch is denial. And so I just jump up through the first escape hatch, and I kind of rest on the platform. And sometimes you do need to rest, and it's okay if you do. But the trouble that I got into is I was pretending I could live on the platform. But the trick of the platform is you can't get off the platform back into the real life that is surrounding you, that you can see, unless you get back down and crawl through the pain and exit the platform underneath through the pain. And so once I figured that out, which again, I'll get into more detail in each of the episodes, then you crawl back through the pain. When it gets to be too much, you escape hatch up through the next one, which is anger. And again, I kind of started looking at the relationship to pain. And I realized that I don't think we are angry because we're angry. I think we choose anger because it's the only emotion that can get big enough to outfeel our pain. And so I think that's why we choose anger, because nothing else could get big enough to keep anger or keep pain out from us other than anger. And so we become angry. So I jump up through the escape hatch of anger so that I can be strong enough that I'm not going to feel my pain. And then when we finally realize the anger isn't going to keep the pain away, we surrender to it. We go back down the escape hatch, feel the pain, crawl through the pain a little bit further. It becomes too much again. So we exit up out of the pain through the escape hatch of bargaining, which in the traditional sense is shoulda, coulda, woulda. If I had done this, if I had done that, if they had made this decision, if they had made that decision, those shoulda, coulda, wouldas, if statements are bargaining. And what I've adopted from a mindset perspective is looking back again at the sequence. Denial is saying, I don't need to feel the pain. I finally realize I can't escape feeling the pain. So then I try to out feel the pain. I realize I can't. So I've kind of redefined bargaining as me trying to out think my pain. And I keep racing through all these different thoughts, as many thoughts as I come up with, to try and outthink the pain. And then when I have thought of everything I can think of to outthink the pain, and I have nothing left to come up with, that's when I surrender to the fact that I can't outthink my pain. So I go back down through the escape hatch, crawl through the pain a little bit more, do that for a little bit, and then it gets to be too much. So then I escape hatch up through depression, rest on the platform, and then I'm depressed. And I had a tough time for a little bit figuring out what's the difference between depression and denial, because they're both avoiding the feeling of pain, saying you don't need to. But again, I started looking at the sequence of the previous hatches, and with anger, you're trying to outfeel the pain. Bargaining, you're trying to outthink the pain. And so I define depression as knowing I can't outthink my pain, knowing I can't outfeel my pain. So I'm refusing to think or feel anything. And so that's how I define depression, is I know that I have to feel the pain, but since I can't outthink it, outfeel it, I'm just not going to think or feel anything. I'm going to block everything out in an effort to block out the pain. And then once I do that for a while, and then the pain still kind of seeps in, and I realize that's not going to work, that's when I crawl back down through the hatch door of depression, crawl a little bit more into acceptance. And then acceptance is the toughest one of all, and that's the one that took me the longest to figure out exactly what it was I needed to accept. And I'm actually going to save that for that specific episode, because it is so challenging, and I need to kind of walk towards that a little bit, because it is pretty challenging. But those are the overview of the stages of grief, which again, I personally define for myself as the bingo cards of grief and the escape hatches of grief, because I'm not heading into death, I'm heading into life without my loved ones. And the opportunity for pain is literally every moment of every day. Chris and I started working together back in 2010, and he not only is an amazing vocalist, but he's become a very good friend. And in addition to all of the musical things that I need to thank him for, I need to thank him for really being a soft place to fall at the early parts of my healing. And I have thanked him many times personally, but I want to do it publicly. When I first started writing the song, it was the first time I really started digging through all of the grief and
looking at it. And so, first of all, the song was not good. But secondly, I kept coming back every 12, 18 months. And I would just show up at his door, and never once did he roll his eyes or sigh or like, we're doing the song again. And if he had, at that point of my healing, I would have shut down and I would have stopped writing the song and I probably would have stopped healing. And so he really allowed me to keep digging, and having him on board and knowing that I could call him in another year and he would deliver, that really got all of this rolling. And so when I did the original album, it was just going to be the I Want to Bring You Joy versions. And when I had about 17 of those versions, I, at that point, realized that Chris's voice, as great as it was, he can't do pain or anger. And so I had actually kind of moved on from him, and that's when I had moved to Nolan. And I started getting depressed, and I realized why. I stopped and said, okay, what's going on? And I just felt horrible that Chris had been such a big factor in all of this, and he wasn't on the album. And so I decided I gotta get him on the album somehow. And I realized that he couldn't sing the I Want to Bring You Joy versions. And I also realized I was depressed because I couldn't actually listen to the album very much, because it was back to where I was 15 years prior in my healing. And it was actually unhealthy for me to go back that far that often. And so I took out a clean sheet of paper and I flipped the lyric to where I was now, which is how I came up with I'm Gonna Bring You Joy. And I did that to get Chris on the album. And in the process of that, I realized I was doing it for myself to reflect where I was. And that kicked off the whole second half of the album. And again, I just have Chris to thank for that.
I sort the memories I make at the end of every day. Scoop up the sack you like, and I tuck them all away. Then I pick one you won't want, dig up the pain that's there, grieve until it's gone, so I have more share. In our first conversation in heaven,
Thanks for tuning in this week. And the next episode is going to be a deep dive into the first stage of grief, which is denial. And I hope that something I've said today helps you bring a little more joy to your first conversation in heaven.